All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Now, today I'm going to be reviewing two books, The Cheechakoes and This Raw Land, both books written by Wayne Short. And now this review is going to take me back to my youth a little bit, growing up in Alaska. There's several things that tie me and these books together, along with my father and the author of the books. And we'll get into that just right off the bat, This is one of the first books I ever read, The Cheechakoes. I talk about The Sword of Shannara being the first book I ever bought with my own money, and the first book that sort of influenced me to become a writer. But as a young boy growing up in Alaska, there were about 5 or 6 books that I actually read prior to The Sword of Shannara. I didn't read The Sword of Shannara till we moved down to southern Utah, but I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And there were several books on my dad's shelf that I would read a lot, and I would read them over and over. The Cheechakoes was one of them. Also, I would read Alaska Sourdough. It was a book about the mountain man Slim Williams, who was a trapper in Alaska. And I also read a book over and over called Scrub Dog of Alaska. And I read Where the Red Fern Grows. And then I also read Chitty Chitty Bang Bang by Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming, of course, wrote the first ever book I ever checked out from the Fairbanks Library was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang by Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming, of course, wrote all the James Bond thrillers. Anyway, so this book was in that rotation of books that I read a lot as a young boy in Alaska, just because they were the ones my dad had. Now, why did my dad have The Cheechakoes by Wayne Short and This Raw Land by Wayne Short? Well, my dad was friends with Wayne Short in the day. I met Wayne Short. In fact, my dad took Wayne Short and his brother Duke on a hunting trip in up north of Fairbanks, and I used to go hunting with my dad all the time, and we used to hunt moose on an army tank. And I've talked about this several times in my videos about Alaska. In fact, I've got a video of the army tank that we hunted on my YouTube channel. If you want to watch a video of us hunting moose, me as a youngster in the 1970s, as a young boy hunting moose in Alaska on an army tank, all you need to do is type into YouTube my last name Durfee and then moose hunting and army tank, and the video is there. It's a cool looking video. I suggest you go watch it. But my dad took Wayne Short, the author of this book, and his brother Duke on a hunting trip on that very same army tank. And that's when I first met Wayne Short and briefly. So I know the author. Now, these books are published by Random House. They were popular books back in the 1960s. They both came out in 1962. And they're about Alaska settlers, the Short family, Wayne Short, Duke Short, Dutch Short, and their parents, settling in Alaska and living off the land. In fact, there's another great video I think you should search out, and it is Wayne Short, the author himself. He's still alive. I think he's like in his late 90s now. These books were written in 1962. They are about Alaska in the 1950s. But Wayne Short is still alive now, and there's a video of him talking about these books. Just type into your YouTube search bar Wayne Short interview or discussion or whatever. I think it's the only video out there. Anyway, so let's talk about the books. We'll talk about the Cheechakoes first, because this is the first book in the series of 2 books. What is a Cheechako, you might ask? Well, ask. What is a Cheechako, you might ask? I'll edit all of that out. What is a Cheechako? Well, it is the Native American word for greenhorn. Some of you are like, well, what the hell is a greenhorn? Well, it's kind of like a rookie in the wilderness, a first-time person out in the wilderness. Now, I'm going to read the bio of Wayne Short just to set up how magnificent these books are and just how crazy the Alaska wilderness is and what type of person would move up there and live just off the land. Okay, so Wayne Short was born. Now, keep in mind, this book came out in 1962. So this guy is older, but it talks about him as a young man. Wayne Short was born 37 years ago in the Arizona desert. My dad was a wandering man, he says. And during the Depression years, we just about wore out the western states. We lived everywhere. I can't remember all the different schools that I attended. But during World War II, I served for the most part in the South Pacific, where I was attached to the amphibious forces and made the island invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. It's crazy. I mean, we all know what Iwo Jima was like. The thing is this guy doesn't talk a lot about his war experiences. So he talks about his Alaska experiences. Probably doesn't want to talk about his war experiences. Okay, so Wayne Short comes from a long line of pioneering people. In 1856, his great-grandfather crowded the large family into an ox-drawn wagons and headed west. So pioneering is in this guy's spirit. They finally settled on the Red River in Texas, where they raised cattle and fought Comanches and Kiowas. Most of this man's sons grew to be cattlemen, but one, Luke Short, the son Luke, sought out the boom towns of the West and was to become one of the West's most well-known gamblers and gunfighters of the era. The next two generations of Shorts turned west and north seeking new country. So I guess it's natural that the family would eventually end up on the last frontier of Alaska. Mr. Wayne Short has worked as a trapper, bounty hunter, cannery owner, skipper tender, and commercial fisherman. And that's kind of where we will start. So we know that Wayne Short came from a long line of adventurers, cowboys, gunslingers. Now he himself his family takes off. So what is this book about Cheechakoes? We're going to talk about this one first and then this one next. So in 1946, right after the World War II, his ma and his pa, Wayne is 20 years old, straight out of the war. Duke is 16. His younger brother Duke is 16. Dutch is 14. Him and those three boys, their mom and pa, they go up into Alaska. They're just going to go live in Alaska. And they settle at a place, Admiralty Island. They set up a tent. There's a little fish canner, there's a little fish place, it's called Murder Cove is where they live. Immediately, right from the get-go, they find deer. The place is abundant with deer. Now, the boys are excited to shoot a deer, but this is where their dad kind of settles them down and says, he gives kind of a lecture. We only shoot at certain times. We only shoot certain deers that are of a certain age. We just don't randomly kill animals. That's not what we're here for. We've got to be very precise in what we do, and they take a lesson from that. One of the boys, the youngest boy, Dutch, is immediately attacked by a brown bear. Now, if you've ever seen a brown bear in Alaska, they are huge. They're not like the little black bear that are roaming around the woods of Utah that are the size of like a poodle. No, brown bears are enormous. I've seen them in the wild myself on our Alaska trips, on our Alaska moose hunting trips when I was a kid. I've seen them. They're crazy big. And now Dutch, the youngest boy, gets immediately attacked by one. And he just gets off he's got a pretty flimsy rifle with him, just gets off a very lucky last second shot at kills the bear. And then what's crazy is the next bear that attacks the group the Dutch was alone when that attack happened. And then the next group, the next bear that attacks them, all four of them, they're the dad and the three sons, and they've got big rifles this time. And between them, it takes them 17 shots to bring this bear down. So violence is random in Alaska. It's random and violent, and you never know what's going to go on. It's just, and this is the theme of these books. And we get to see the horrors. It's kind of like this Swiss Family Robinson-esque story of this family making living off the land, making a living off the land by selling fish and being fishermen. The horrors and difficulties of just being a trapper, as you trapping animals. The horrors of being a deep sea fisherman, being dumped into the frozen ocean and tossed in the sea, while wearing heavy clothes and having to strip down and bob in the sea, just hoping that you'll be. I mean, a lot of this stuff. I'm not going to give away a lot of the adventures that they go through, but they go through a lot of adventures. And in the background, one of the things I like about this story is in the background there's a loon, a bird that just kind of shrieks in the night, that just kind of terrible. During the terrible times, it's shrieking. During the more settled times, it's kind of a beacon call of the wild. They're living off the land, the thrill of, and then there's lighthearted moments too, like the thrill of going to town, after living in such harsh conditions and just enjoying civilization again, and how these three boys are growing up in the landscape and wondering, well, how will we ever get married? I mean, this is kind of like, I mean, this is a harsh place. What woman's going to want to live with us up here? Our mom likes it, but will any other ladies like it? Which leads us straight into the second book, This Raw Land. So this is an adventure novel, a true life adventure novel about these three boys settling the last frontier of Alaska on Admiralty Island, right down there in the midst of the sea, the harsh sea, the bears on the land, the killer whales in the ocean, and all of it. And then who's gonna come up, or how are we gonna survive? How are we gonna make if no women? Well, then we get to This Raw Land, which is got this great cover by and both of them have great covers. This one's got a great set of illustrations by an illustrator named Peter Parnell, and the cover was done by Peter Parnell, and there's a lot of illustrations through this. And there's also a great map. The map in both, and here's some of the illustrations inside. It's just a delightfully put together book, and there's a great map of the area they live in the second book. Let me see if I can find it here. So the second book, I should have just marked the page where the map was. Oh, there it is. We can see the map of where they lived: Admiralty Island, Baranof Island. They initially settled on Admiralty Island, but then they moved to Baranof Island. And I wanted to just read the first part of the jacket copy of this, of the second book. Wildlife abounds here: deer, black bear, brown bear, grizzlies, mountain goats, as well as moose. Countless seals and sea lions, whales, killer whales, and porpoises feed and live in the inland waterways. It is a fisherman and bird hunter's paradise. This is a land of strange contrasts. It can be lonely as a loon's demented laugh floats across an isolated bay. Sometimes it is, and I love the fact that he's got this theme of the loon making sounds wherever he goes. Sometimes it is breathtakingly beautiful. It can be a violent land too, just waiting to catch you at a weak moment and kill you. That's so true. Just as a kid living up there, me and my father went on so many adventures north of Alaska, moose hunting on the Copper River, which is just a wild river, fishing for salmon. Oh my God, it gives me chills just thinking of the Copper River. Okay, but anyway, into this raw land I brought my young wife, and this is the story of the life we made there. So this is the sequel. I mean, this book is about him and his mom and dad, and they were young boys. Now he's brought his own wife up here, and now he's got his own family. He met his wife in San Francisco. She was her name was Barb. She was from Iowa. Brings her to Alaska. She's a little bit nervous about this. First thing that she notices is every morning they get waken up to a shotgun blast real early in the morning as one of Wayne's brothers blasts a shotgun every morning to announce it's breakfast time. So now they're all living off the land again, and now they've moved to Baranof Island. They moved from Admiralty Island and Murder Cove over to Baranof Island to an area, and they're still making a living as fishermen. The ice fishermen, the whole fisherman TV show. I mean, this is what they're living. But this is back in the 1950s and 60s when it was probably so much more dangerous. And his wife is immediately amazed at the beauty of the land, the abundance and majesty of the whales, the killer whales, the nuisance that the belligerent sea lions can be. And I've seen the sea lions, and they are kind of like the coyotes, or just the nuisance kind of rodents of the sea is what they are. That's a good description of them. Anyway, in this book, we get more bear attacks. In fact, we get a violent bear attack where one of his friends is almost mauled to death. And the horror of that, the horror of surviving that, the horror of a bush plane crash. I've flown in bush planes above the Alaskan landscape out to Lake Tenada, and up above to Bettles Field, up above the Arctic Circle. And those bush planes are small, and they're cool, and they're fun, and it's a great adventure. But man, a lot of them up in Alaska crash. We get scenes of that. We get all these horrors of the Alaska wilderness just come through, and trying to eke out a living in a very lonely place. Of course, there's just like in the first book, where there's the lighter side, where they adventure into the city once in a while. This one, there's lighter. He gives a little bit of a lighter side, where what are things like during Christmas in Alaska? How does Christmas go off in Alaska? I remember Alaska Christmases, and they're just a more magical Christmas than anywhere else you're going to get in the world. And this is just this kind of just has a poignant ending. The whole saga of this family and their adventures in Alaska. And it's real. All of it is real. This is not novel. This is not made up. Even though it's told as if it's a novel, these are read, you can read through these as if they're novels. They're told in the storytelling style of novels. It's just starts and ends with just sort of this poignant kind of like feel of, the very last line, again, is of a loon's lonely cry out into the wilderness. And it just kind of like, sort of, you just settle on this, is how long is the last frontier going to last? Alaska is a huge place. Everything in Alaska is bigger and better and just more wild and more violent and more crazy than everywhere else. And anybody that goes up to Alaska is touched by its magic. I grew up there for the good portion of my younger years, and I still think of it as this magical, mythical, larger-than-life place. And Wayne Short does a great job in both of these books of spelling that out in beautiful detail. His prose as he's writing about the glaciers and the different things up there, it's just absolutely magnificent. Delightful books, both. Violent books, but PG rated, excellent adventure novels. I mean, they could take, just like that show Yellowstone with Kevin Costner about the ranch and how important that ranch is, and how, there's the book, the TV show 1883, and then 1923, and then the Yellowstone. They could do a series of this guy's life and just the homesteading in Alaska, and it would be every bit as interesting and harrowing as the TV show Yellowstone, and probably even more dangerous and violent, especially the landscape is out to kill you there. In Yellowstone, that show, it's other people out to kill you. In Alaska, the landscape will kill you just quicker. I mean, the landscape is more unforgiving and can be just as evil. It doesn't mean it's not trying to be evil. Not the landscape, the animals aren't trying to be evil. They're doing their thing. And it can be bad. And I like how the lonely cry of a loon is sprinkled through these books, and how it just sort of spells out how long will the last frontier last? How long do we have until these wild places are taken over? And he was worried about it even in the 1950s and 60s when he was writing these books. It's very evident. Even though they were making their living off of the land, there's a great respect paid to the land and the landscape throughout these novels. From the father's very first lecture on when we kill deer and when we don't kill deer, all the way to the end. Even though this family is making their living off of the land and off of the animals that live there and the sea creatures that live there, there's a deep, deep respect for everything that's going on up there. And will it last? He's worried about, well, I mean, he's still, if you watch the video interview he does on YouTube, he's still concerned about those things. And some of the stories he tells on the TV interview are not in these books. And they're funny to listen to. So, here's a picture of the guy on the back, in case I haven't showed you that. So anyway, I've always wanted to reread this book. And then I've never read this. This is the first time I've read this one. I've read this one a lot when I was a kid, and now I've reread this and then read this one for the first time. And I've always wanted to leave a review on the channel of these little known but very important books of someone that I knew. Someone that was a friend of my father's, and up in Alaska. So anyway, the Cheechakoes and This Raw Land both get an enthusiastic 10 out of 10 stars for being the absolute great Alaskan adventure stories that they are.